All right, well, back again to tackle some Henry David Thoreau, and this time we're going to look at a small, and man, I hate that we had so much of Walden and so little of civil disobedience, because civil disobedience is such a strong thing. But you know what, probably a blessing that we don't have more, because I know I can already see myself getting in trouble with what we have here. So let's talk about civil disobedience, which I actually have part of it over here. So, yes, civil disobedience. Okay, so this has got Walden and civil disobedience in it. And civil disobedience is actually a very small part of it. So, you got this whole thick book here, up to 265 pages before civil disobedience begins, and it lasts all up probably about 23 pages. The rest of this is Walden. But, man, those 23 pages, man, they have such an impact on my life, and a lot of people who are much more important than me have said the same thing. So civil disobedience was really written as a response to a night in jail that Thoreau spent when he refused to pay a poll tax that he knew was going to support the Mexican-American War, which he strongly disagreed with. So, according to your book now, they said this was written to urge people to resist governmental policies with which they disagree. All right. And, and again, so disobeying civil authority. Okay. But it also advocates peacefully doing this, not, the violent route that so many people choose to take. And this has been a massive influence on people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King, who like to practice this peaceful civil disobedience. I think civil here meaning polite as well as disobeying civil authorities, but also the idea of disobeying in the proper manner, as opposed to like, I'm angry, so I want to fight people or burn things to the ground, which, has very little like lasting effect. It has good shock value, but doesn't really change people's minds the way that this stuff did. Okay, so we got a very short, probably not even barely a page of this, all right? But there's so much to talk about. Now, I want to go ahead and preface this by saying some of the stuff he says in here doesn't really fit with typical conservative thoughts, and that's fine. No one's asking you to buy into what Thoreau is saying. I buy into some of it, and I hope that doesn't make some of you think I'm a bad person. But I also realize that a lot of it is just not possible, and it's great on paper, but in practice is not. But again, no one is requiring you to believe any of this. What I'm requiring is for you to think about it and for you to be able to respond to it, just like I said in the last video, okay? All right, so we're going to be on 388. Starts out saying, I heartily accept the motto that government is best which governs least, and I should like to see it acted upon more rapidly and systematically. Carried out, it might finally amount to this, which I also believe, that government is best which governs not at all. And when men are prepared for it, that will be the kind of government which they will have. Now, that right away, I'm going to tell you, again, not trying to get myself in trouble, I agree with 100%. And the funny thing to me is I have tons of friends and people I speak to who have varying political beliefs, and you see liberals and conservatives both saying that the best type of government is the government that does the least amount of work. So I don't think that's by nature a conservative or a liberal ideology where government is less involved. It seems to be more of a conservative thought because you see the liberal side you wanting to use bigger government and doing more and more with it. But the funny thing is that both sides do it. But Thoreau's idea is more about the government just not governing, period. Now again, that people, so some of you right now who have a little bit of background, anything political, are probably thinking, oh my goodness, he's advocating for anarchy. And that's not technically what he's saying, although I see why you would feel that way. His idea here is that when people are prepared for it, and he's going to point out his argument here for the fact that the government really is more of a chore and more of a hindrance than it is a positive, okay? Rather than anarchy, maybe, and I'm going to tell you there's a lot more similarities in these than you want to agree, but there's definitely a strong libertarian vibe from what Thoreau is saying here. So he says, government is at best but an expedient, but most governments are usually, and all governments are sometimes, inexpedient. So he's like, at best, it's a way to help things, to make things a little quicker, to streamline things. But he says usually they do the opposite. The objections which have been brought against the standing army, and they are many and weighty and deserve to prevail, may also be brought against the standing government. The standing army is only an arm of the standing government. The government itself, which is only the mode which the people have chosen to execute their will, is equally liable to be abused and perverted before the people can act through it. Witness the present Mexican War, the work of comparatively a few individuals using the standing government as their tool, for in the outset the people would not have consented to this measure. So he's pointing out that government is more likely to be abused by people who have the ability than it is to be used properly. And by the time the proper channels can... bell. Okay, and by the time the proper channels can be followed, typically it's tough to pull it off because so many people who have, who are involved in the government are already corrupt. So since this American government, what is it but a tradition, though a recent one, endeavoring to transmit itself unimpaired to posterity, but at each instant losing some of its integrity? He's pointing out that it seems like each generation that our particular form of government has been passed down, it's lost some of its integrity. And again, like I pointed out in Walden, if Thoreau was to, be able to travel to 2020 and, sorry, I had somebody at the door, would be able to do that. And sorry, let me back up because that threw me off. If he could travel to 2020 and see what we've become today, I think he would feel like this was definitely true, that we actually we've lost so much of our integrity and what our founding fathers originally envisioned with all of its flaws to what we are today. It is not the vitality and force of a single living man, for a single man can bend it to its will. It is a sort of wooden gun to the people themselves, and if ever they should use it in earnest as a real one against each other, it will surely split. But it is not the less necessary for this. For the people must have some complicated machinery or other, and hear its din to satisfy the idea of government, which they have. Government show thus how successfully men can be imposed on, and even impose on themselves for their own advantage. And he points out here that but people can't. And this is where, those of you who got angry when he initially said that no government is the best government, basically, that can't work. And he points out that it can't. He says that because we need something noisy and loud that looks like it's doing something so we can feel like things are getting done, which any of you that pay attention to politics know that very little is getting done lately, but it sure does make a lot of noise. And he says that's why we feel like something is happening. Okay, it's why I like keyboards, the mechanical keyboards that make noises when I type, because it lets me know I'm typing. Some of you have those little Surface Airs or whatever, or the iPads that have the little keyboard that makes no noise when you touch it. I can't do it. It drives me nuts. I need to hear the click. So he's saying government's like that. It is excellent we must all allow, yet this government never of itself furthered any enterprise, but by the alacrity with which it got out of its way. And this is a strong point. He's pointing out the only time government's been useful is when it's gotten out of its own way and allowed other things to do what they do. He says it does not keep the country free. It does not settle the West. It does not educate. So he's pointing out that these are the things that the people do. The government doesn't do that. It may provide the money and the resources to do those things, but at the end of the day, I'm the one who's educating people. Your uncle or dad or grandparent who fought in the military is the one keeping our country free. It's the people, what they do, that is actually, achieving things. The government finds ways to cause more trouble. It is the point Thoreau's making. It's not the point Mr. Morris is making. So let me separate those two real quick. He says the character inherent in the American people has done all that and has been done all that has been accomplished, and it would have done somewhat more if the government had not sometimes gotten in its way. For government is an expedient by which men would fain succeed in letting one another alone, and as has been said, when it is most expedient, the governed are most let alone by it. He's like, we probably could have achieved a lot more if it wasn't for the government interfering. And he says, we get the most done when it leaves us the most alone. That's the goal. Okay, again, and that's something that you're welcome to disagree with. No one is saying, and I'm not even saying I fully agree, okay? But I am saying that it's an interesting point. It's a point that's had massive influence on our country, and this document has had massive influence on, I wouldn't even just say our country, on the world. This trade and commerce, if they were not made of India rubber, would never manage to bounce over the obstacles which legislators are continually putting in their way. And if one were to judge these men wholly by the effects of their actions and not partly by their intentions, they would deserve to be classed and punished with those mischievous persons who put obstructions on the railroads. I mean, he's comparing the government here. The metaphor is the government is like, or the simile is like it's the people that put things on the railroads and cause the trains to derail. He said that's what our government does with our day-to-day life. I mean, he's really got some issues with the government here. This guy was not a fan. But to speak practically and as a citizen, unlike those who call themselves no government men, I ask for not at once no government at all, but at once a better government. So he says, I don't want to be totally associated with, because anarchists were a thing back then. I believe they were still, they were functioning. He's like, I don't want to be associated with them. What I want is a better government. And here's how he defines that. He says, let every man make known what kind of government would command his respect, and that will be our one step towards obtaining it. So the first step is just to figure out what we would respect about a government? What are things we would like about a government? And then to start building that government, because the government's made up of us. So let's elect people we respect. Let's have people in power who we respect and who will respect us. And then, no government's not really the necessity. It's then we have a better government that maybe can help. All right. Now, you can see right away how this little excerpt we have could definitely be a contentious document, and how a lot of people could look at this and get angry and fly off the handles. And maybe even some of you felt a little twinge of distaste. Totally fine. We're reading this from a perspective of the historical value and looking at his argumentation. No one is asking you to develop your own you're believing like Thoreau, even any more than I'm asking you to move out in the middle of the woods and try to live without, any kind of attachments like we talked about in Walden. So, but the historical value of this is immense, guys. And the ideas are not, without merit. They're definitely things to consider. So, all right, much shorter than the Walden excerpt, but, still, and much better in my opinion, too, to be honest with you. So this is going to be our stopping point. I'm going to end here, and this will be it. If we had more time, I might bring in some more excerpts from this, but since I don't, I'm going to go ahead and let it lie, and end this video. I got some poetry videos to do for the seniors next, so this would definitely be more enjoyable. Let me tell you. All right, guys, I hope you have a great evening. I hope you stay warm, because I'm looking at 30-degree weather tonight. And, of course, that's exciting for me. Mr. Morris might just stay outside tonight. But I know that that's the minority, and most of you are beach people who despise this weather. So stay warm, stay safe, and I'll see you tomorrow.